In this episode of True Crime Black, we start with the case of a young girl whose family was targeted by gunmen. While returning home from a football game, her family was attacked by 3 men who opened fire in the middle of the night. The young girl was hit with a single bullet and the gunman got away. Then, we look at the case of 2 children who suddenly vanished without a trace. Their families would be told that their children were found as fully grown adults. But is that the case? Or were they the victims of a cruel hoax? Let's find out. We don't solve these cases by ourselves. We rely on everyone. Those are the words of Elkhart City Police Detective Sergeant Steve Price. His words come after a family had to face a tragic event. As the family was returning home from a community event, they were approached by 3 men carrying guns. When things began to go awry for the gunmen, they opened fire. After that, the family's life was never the same. The police have been asking for help from the community ever since. This is the case of Kristyana Jackson. 7-year-old Kristyana Jackson attended Mary Daly Elementary School in 2012. She was described by everyone as a bright and loving little girl with big dreams and a big heart. Kristyana loved to express herself in many different ways. She loved to dance and sing. She also loved to read and swim. That year, she was a new big sister to her newborn little brother. Her parents, John and Kimi Jackson, had been together for more than a decade. They had only 2 children, Kristyana and her 8-month-old brother. John worked at a factory in the area and Kimi worked as a hairdresser. When the couple wasn't working, they loved spending time with their kids. Things were looking great for the loving family. Sadly, their lives would be changed forever on one summer night. Kimi and Kristyana had just made it home one evening when they were faced with a terrifying attack. The family lived in Elkhart, Indiana. On Friday, August 17, 2012, the 2 of them were returning home after attending a football game at the local high school. Kimi pulled into her driveway at around 10:30 p.m. that night. They got out of their car in the dark night. Before they could even make it to the front porch, 3 men approached them. The men were holding guns. It turns out that there was someone inside the house. John stayed home that evening to take care of the couple's 8-month-old son. From inside the house, he heard the commotion in the driveway. He immediately ran to the door and opened it. The 3 men were startled by his presence and began to open fire. John immediately began his attempts to get his wife and daughter to safety. Kristyana was closer to the door, so John grabbed her first. He picked her up and ran to the front door as bullets were firing at him and his family. The 3 men quickly realized that the commotion was attracting way too much attention. They abandoned their plot to get inside the house and ran off. When the commotion settled, the family had begun to see the damage done by the gunmen. John had been shot several times while trying to protect his daughter. Despite the damage, he was still able to get his daughter inside the house. But when he got inside, he was met with a parent's worst nightmare. Kristyana had been shot by the gunman as well. Kimi was luckily unharmed since she had not reached the porch yet and was out of the line of fire. When she realized the severity of her daughter's injuries, she called 911 for help. Neighbors who heard the commotion began gathering around the house. By the time the ambulance and emergency services got to the Jacksons' home, they had to push their way through a massive crowd of neighbors from the community. They soon noticed that Kristyana had been shot once in the head. John was shot 3 times in his upper body. Fortunately for him, none of his vital organs were hit and his injuries were not fatal. The paramedics were focused on Kristyana and her injuries. They tried desperately to keep her alive and in stable condition. The ambulance would soon arrive and rush her to South Bend's Memorial Hospital. Doctors would perform emergency brain surgery on the young girl in an attempt to save her life. John received treatment for his injuries at the same hospital. After he was in good condition, he and Kimi were visited by detectives at the hospital. They were asked questions about the gunman that terrorized them. Both parents expressed that they had no idea who the men could have been. They also had no idea why their house was targeted. The couple couldn't give any description of the gunman either, since they were wearing masks that covered their faces. Kimi told the detectives what happened leading up to the events of that night. She took her daughter to Elkhart Memorial High School so that they could watch a relative play in the football game. John remained at home to take care of their infant son. Both explained that nothing out of the ordinary took place that night. With not much to go off of, the detectives initially believed that this was a robbery gone wrong. They were unable to determine if the gunman specifically targeted the Jackson household or if it was just a crime of opportunity. The gunman clearly didn't know that John was home at the time and panicked when he appeared at the door. On Kristyana's end, things were not looking good. Doctors worked around the clock to save her life, but had become aware that the gunshot to her head caused irreversible damage to her brain. They declared her brain dead shortly after. The family was now in the horrible position of having to choose between keeping her on life support or pulling the plug. They collectively came to the decision that they would take her off of life support. Kristyana was officially declared dead just 2 days after the family was attacked by the 3 gunmen. The investigators conducted several interviews throughout the next several weeks. They were relentlessly questioning the members of the neighborhood in an attempt to find some information. Sadly though, they made very little progress in the case. They could find no suspects and no motive. They still believe that there is someone in the neighborhood who knows more information than they are willing to share. They would make several public statements as a way of appealing to the community's senses, but no one has ever come forward. Kristyana's parents share the same belief as the detectives. John and Kimi have been very vocal about their frustration with the community. They believe that someone knows more information than they have been sharing and can't believe that no one has come forward. They want that person, or persons, to do the right thing and help solve the murder of their daughter. To this day, the murder of Kristyana Jackson remains unsolved. Now, we look at the case of LaMoine Allen and Kreneice Jones. The area of Woodville, Mississippi had to bear witness to a family's tragedy. 2 toddlers were playing in front of a grocery store back in the early 90s. That was a time when the country was really coming to grips with the loss of innocence that children were going to have to endure. Predators were seemingly at every corner waiting to grab a young child and disappear for as long as they could get away with it. And that's what the police believe happened in this case. The 2 toddlers suddenly vanished without a trace. What happened to them? Sadly, we still don't have any answers. This is the case of LaMoine Allen and Kreneice Jones. On May 10, 1992, 2-year-old LaMoine and 3-year-old Kreneice were brought together in Woodville, Mississippi. The young children were not biologically related in any way, but their families were very close friends. According to the investigators, LaMoine was traveling with his uncle and aunt, Glenn Edwards and Leola Jackson. Kreneice was traveling with her mother, Carla Russell, and her boyfriend, Tyrone Edwards. That morning, Carla and her daughters, Kreneice and Kristyana, attended the morning service at the New Jerusalem Baptist Church. Afterward, they made their way to Woodville. Kristyana would later tell the investigators that LaMoine's family was unfamiliar to both her and her sister. They had never even met LaMoine before that day either. Once Kristyana and Kreneice got to Woodville, they went to Kimi Jackson's grocery store, which was owned by Leola's parents. The children spent all day playing in the front yard of the store while their parents and guardians huddled in their own section. At one point, Leola and Glenn went to check on LaMoine. Oddly, they were unable to find him. When they told the group that they couldn't find him, Carla started calling out for Kreneice. She got no answer. Kristyana told her mother that she and Kreneice were playing, but at one point she was gone. The families immediately began searching every part of the area. They even expanded to the surrounding community. Sadly, they had no luck. LaMoine and Kreneice were nowhere to be found. With no luck finding the children, the families contacted the police. The authorities, along with local volunteers and sniffer dogs, carried out a thorough search of the locality as well as the town of Woodville. They also had no luck. The police now believe that the children were put into a vehicle and driven away from Woodville. Reports suggest that their theory stemmed from witness accounts of a vehicle sitting idle in the area. The investigators described the vehicle as a blue compact car with chrome hubcaps, a false convertible top, and dark-tinted windows. That car has not been identified to this very day. The case grew cold until Carla got a promising update. A woman in Buffalo, New York, going by Ms. Cook, reached out to her and told her that she believed Kreneice was living with her. Strangely, when Carla and the authorities attempted to follow up with Ms. Cook, she claimed that she lost contact with the woman who she believed was Kreneice. Then, in 2012, Carla got a similar call from LaMoine's family. They told her that they located both children. That led Carla to a woman named Brittany, who was a mother of 3 children. Physically, Brittany looked similar to Kreneice. However, a DNA test would prove that she was not the missing girl. Despite those results, Carla is certain that she'd found her daughter. Since then, there have been no new updates. Age-progressed photographs of both missing children have been released to the public, but there are still no leads. Both LaMoine and Kreneice's families believe that their children are safe somewhere. Kristyana has taken a DNA test through a website, hoping for a match with her missing sister one day. Until then, LaMoine and Kreneice remain missing.